What's going on, guys? I'm CFB Kings, and welcome back to another episode of the CFBKings Show. Really appreciate you tuning in today, and happy Tuesday. It's November 19th, 2024. Week 12 just concluded, and we're right in the thick of everything right now. Conference championship game matchups are being decided. The college football playoff contender field's starting to get a little bit thinner, and today we're going to be breaking down everything from Week 12. Before we get into today's episode, I just wanted to say thanks again for all the support lately. I like to do this every couple weeks just to really express my gratitude, but we recently surpassed 500 subscribers here on YouTube. We're almost at 37,000 on Twitter and just past 88,000 on Instagram, and I really can't thank you enough. We gained over 400 followers on Saturday alone on Instagram, and also had the third highest viewed video that the page has ever had. 3.6 million views on Saturday and Sunday from that reel of Purdue's wide receiver catching the ball while standing out of bounds. So, just wanted to let you know how much I appreciate it, and thanks again. All right, let's get into number 12 Georgia's impressive victory over number 7 Tennessee. The Dogs beat the Vols 31-17. They kept their college football playoff hopes alive, and both teams are now 8-2. As much as we as a college football community have dumped on Carson Beck over the past few weeks, he was very solid on Saturday night, and he was the primary reason that they won this game. He was 25 of 40, that's 63%, which isn't crazy good, but definitely not bad, for 347 yards and 2 touchdowns, and then also had 3 carries for 32 yards, 10.7 yards per carry, and a rushing touchdown as well. 379 total yards, 3 total touchdowns, 0 interceptions, 0 fumbles against the top 10 opponent. And I think the praise should be just as significant as the criticism was for him over the past few weeks, because yes, he has played poorly at times and potentially cost them some games, but he won this one for them on Saturday night over Tennessee. I will say there were quite a few questionable calls in this game, and mainly plays that could have been penalties that weren't called that way. And SEC officiating has been probably the worst of any conference throughout the season, but even though this was a 14-point loss for the Vols, it was a 7-point game, under 3 minutes left, and quite a few calls went against Tennessee. Of course, that wasn't the only reason that they lost. Obviously, they were outgained by 150 yards, but yeah, it's just been a point of contention all year how bad referees in the SEC have been, and that was really on full display on Saturday night in Athens. Both teams are still alive for the college football playoff. Their SEC chances are pretty much 0, especially for Tennessee, but the Dogs do have a long shot chance at the SEC championship game. They need Texas A&M to lose to both Auburn and Texas. They need Alabama to lose to Oklahoma or Auburn, and they need Ole Miss to lose to Florida or Mississippi State. So there technically is a path there, but it's a long shot at best. Number 1 Oregon very narrowly escaped Wisconsin 16-13 on Saturday night in Madison, but if you listen to last week's episode previewing Week 12, and specifically this game, that 3-point margin of victory for the Ducks shouldn't come as much of a surprise at all. Here's a quick clip from last week's episode where I described why this game would probably be pretty tight. The Ducks are 14-point favorites, the over-under is 52, implied score of 33-19 Oregon, but I think it could be a lot closer than that. I want to turn your attention to Oregon's schedule real quick. Saturday will be their 8th consecutive game. They haven't had a bye week since September 21st. They will have played UCLA, Michigan State, Ohio State, Purdue, Illinois, Michigan, Maryland, and now Wisconsin, all without a break. And what was Wisconsin doing last week? They were sitting at home, resting up during a bye week. And when you factor in that Oregon has to make yet another trip cross-country out to Wisconsin, all of these games in a row, all of the long-distance travel, I think that could play a significant factor. Okay, we're back here on the Week 12 recap episode, and 8 consecutive games for the Ducks without a bye week, another cross-country trip. I took Wisconsin plus 13.5. I posted about it on Twitter and Instagram and tried to explain my case for why I thought this would be close, and the writing was all over the wall for how this game turned out. This was probably my best read on a potential major upset since Kentucky nearly beat Georgia. I made a big deal about that one as well when the Wildcats were 21-point underdogs, I think, and I tried to explain for like a week leading up to that game why it would be close, and the Oregon-Wisconsin matchup was very, very similar. The ESPN win probability chart actually gave the Badgers a 75% chance to win this game at one point, right at the end of the third quarter. Oregon trailed by a touchdown going into the fourth. This was a tie game with under 3 minutes left, but the Ducks just made a couple more plays down the stretch to earn the win. Despite the margin being very tight, the Ducks got the win. They improved to 11-0. They hold on to that number 1 spot, and now they get a much-needed bye week before finishing their regular season against Washington in a couple weeks. Number 20 Clemson took down 7-2 Pitt on the road in a wild 24-20 game. Cade Klubnik was huge for the Tigers. He was 27 of 41, 66%, for 329 total yards and 3 total touchdowns, including a 50-yard rushing touchdown in the final minute to give Clemson the lead. I've had him in my Heisman rankings that I post every Monday on Twitter and Instagram for a while now, but Klubnik should really be getting more attention for that award. He has 31 total touchdowns and just 4 interceptions so far this year. He's 4th in the FBS in passing touchdowns, 3rd in the Power 4, and he's really been the difference for Clemson in several games this season. Wide receiver Antonio Williams was big for them as well. He had 13 receptions for 149 yards and 2 touchdowns. And then defensive end TJ Parker. We'll save his stats for the end of the episode because he is a king of the week. But yeah, stick around to the end to see how crazy he was in that game. Clemson's victory over Pitt keeps their hopes alive to get to the ACC championship game and also keeps them alive for a potential at-large CFP bid. Week 12 was the week of the upset in a couple ways, especially with some really critical results in the Big 12. Kansas took down number 6 BYU, the Cougars' run of close calls caught up with them, and their undefeated season comes to an end as they fall to 9-1. The 2024 Kansas Jayhawks might be the best 4-6 team in college football history, and that's only mildly an exaggeration. Their losses this season are to 7-3 Illinois by 6, to 8-2 UNLV by 3, to West Virginia by 4, and that was a game that they led by 10 points in the fourth quarter, to 6-4 TCU by 11, to 8-2 Arizona State by 4, and to 7-3 Kansas State by 2. They have losses by 6, 3, 4, 4, and 2. 4 of those teams have been ranked this season, and all of them are above 500. They've really played well all year long, and they had some turnover troubles at the beginning of the season, but now that they got those under control, they're finally starting to translate that play into wins. And looking back at their schedule now, it looks way, way harder than it initially looked at the beginning of the season. For example, when they lost to UNLV, that was like, yikes, what is wrong with Kansas? How did they just lose to UNLV, who, historically has not been good in the slightest at football? But this season, they're 8-2, and those losses are by 5 to Boise State and by 3 in double overtime to Syracuse. So they are an 8-2 team that is a hair from being 10-0 and probably ranked in the top 15 around where Boise State is. And now looking at that game, it's like, dang, Kansas almost beat that team, when at the time it looked like a pretty bad loss. So to make things even more fun, they've beaten back-to-back ranked teams. They beat number 17 Iowa State 2 weeks ago and number 6 BYU, of course, on Saturday. And now they get Colorado at home next week. This win over BYU was huge, of course, because they beat the number 6 team on the road, but what it also did was keep them alive for a bowl game. And when they were 2-6 2 weeks ago, things looked very, very grim. Now they're 4-6, and they just need to beat Colorado and Baylor in order to be eligible for a bowl game. Another upset in the Big 12 was Arizona State taking out Kansas State 24-14, and despite what you might have heard on College Game Day on Saturday morning, this was a very important game. If I told you on Saturday, okay, Arizona State is going to score 3 points in the last 40 minutes of game time today, how much would you have picked K-State to win by? Because that's what happened. Arizona State got out to a blazing hot start. They had 21 points in the first 20 minutes. And then after that, they just had one field goal after the 10-minute mark in the second quarter. And not only did they win, they won by double digits. Quarterback Sam Leavitt was great for the Sun Devils. He had 317 total yards and 3 touchdowns. Cam Scatabo was great as usual. He had 117 total yards, and that ASU defense was just stifling all night. Arizona State will finally be ranked tonight. They are 8-2. Yes, Arizona State is 8-2. And I mentioned it in the preview episode, but they've quietly had one of the best stories of the season in year 2 under Kenny Dillingham after going 3-9 last year. 3-9 last season, and now they're 8-2. And with the win over Kansas State, the Sun Devils are firmly in position to reach the Big 12 championship game. And if they do, that of course carries college football playoff possibilities for Arizona State. If you're watching on YouTube, here's a look at the Big 12 standings. ASU is currently 3rd behind just BYU and Colorado. And if you haven't peeked ahead at next week's slate, Arizona State hosts BYU on Saturday, and they're a 3.5-point favorite. So they're currently 3rd, but have the opportunity to earn the head-to-head win over BYU and jump them next week. and then they just need to beat Arizona and have Iowa State lose to Utah or Kansas State, and they'd be in the Big 12 title game. Another upset that wasn't really an upset in my eyes was Florida taking down number 22 LSU in the Swamp. The Gators finally got one after getting beaten by Miami, choking the game to Tennessee, narrowly losing to Georgia. They finally put it all together and beat a ranked rival, and did so by double digits. The final score was 27-16, and Jaden Ball sealed the deal on a 55-yard touchdown run with 3:48 to play. Ball was great yet again. Lagway was phenomenal at quarterback. He was playing just 2 weeks after getting carted off the field with a hamstring injury against Georgia. He had 226 yards and a touchdown, and most importantly, 0 turnovers. This win was huge for Florida, of course, because they beat a ranked rival, and a rival that they hadn't beaten since 2018, I want to say. But what it also means for them is that they're probably going bowling this year. They just need to win one of the next 2, and nothing is a given, but I believe they have a good shot to beat Florida State. The loss drops LSU to 6-4, Florida improves to 5-5, and just like that, after everything that the Gators went through in the first month of the season, and really beyond that, first 2 months of the season, they're just one game different in overall record than a team who had SEC championship and college football playoff hopes like 10 days ago. LSU now hosts Vanderbilt, and they will try to avoid their 4th consecutive loss, and the Gators look to be spoilers again and ruin Ole Miss's hopes as the Rebels visit the Swamp on Saturday. Keeping the upset trend going, Stanford took down number 19 Louisville in a 38-35 thriller on Saturday. Stanford came into this game as a 20.5-point underdog, but they didn't care, and they made critical play after critical play down the stretch in order to win this game. They did also get a lot of help from the Cardinals. Louisville was without their starting running back, Isaac Brown, for the last 3 quarters of the game, and then they also made some horrendous penalties and major clock management mistakes at the end of the game as well. Louisville had a 98.7% chance to win this game, with 6 minutes and 50 seconds left in the 4th quarter. They led 35-21 with under 7 minutes to play and lost. If you're watching on YouTube, just look at this ESPN win probability chart. The definition of a collapse, and that percentage just drops off a cliff in Stanford's favor. If you missed the ending of this game, it was absolutely ridiculous. Louisville had the ball 35-35, 1st and 10 with 19 seconds left at the Stanford 45. They then proceed to throw 4 consecutive incomplete passes while trying to get to field goal range. And the worst part was, they threw all of those passes in a grand total of 14 seconds. They left Stanford time, which is like the only thing you can't do there. So Stanford gets the ball, they throw 1 pass to the sideline. Then a Louisville defender pushes the receiver out of bounds and gets a 15-yard penalty for unsportsmanlike conduct for talking to him afterward. So the 15-yard penalty moves Stanford into position to try a 57-yard field goal, whereas they would have just had to chuck a Hail Mary before. But we're not even done yet. Louisville then jumps offside, trying to block a 57-yard field goal for some reason. That moved the ball up 5 more yards to now a 52-yard field goal, and Emmett Kenny knocked it through for the win. Louisville drops to 6-4 with all 4 losses by 7 points or less, and that 4th loss cost them their ranking in the CFP Top 25 tonight. This game also had a King of the Week on the Stanford side, which we'll get to in a bit, so make sure to stick around to the end for that. Number 21 South Carolina beat number 23 Missouri in a wild one in Columbia SC, the battle for Columbia. This game had an insane win probability chart as well and was back and forth all throughout the 4th quarter. 4 different lead changes in the last 9 minutes of the game, including Luther Burden's 37-yard touchdown with a minute left, and then Rocket Sanders' 15-yard touchdown with 15 seconds left. After a start to the season that saw them nearly lose to Old Dominion at home, they beat the Monarchs by 4 in Week 1, the same margin that they beat Missouri by, ironically. But despite that rocky start, South Carolina is now 7-3 and will have their highest ranking since 2014 in tonight's CFP Top 25. The Gamecocks have their FCS opponent Wofford this week, and then they have what will be, barring a total catastrophe against the Terriers, a ranked matchup against Clemson in Death Valley to close the regular season. Getting back on the upset train, New Mexico took down number 18 Washington State, and again, if you watched the Week 12 preview last week, this one wasn't a surprise. I straight up picked the Lobos to win. I'll give my rundown of all my picks in a minute, but Devin Dampier and New Mexico have had this potential all year long, and things clicked for them on Saturday night. This is the Lobos' first win over a ranked opponent since 2003, and in year one under Bronco Mendenhall, they have their most wins in a season since 2016. So first ranked win since 2003. They had lost 26 straight to ranked opponents. This was also their first win over a top 20 team since 1994, and their first non-conference top 20 win since 1940. They beat number 18 Texas Tech 19-14, 84 years ago. And that was their last win over a non-con top 20 team before they beat number 18 Washington State on Saturday night. The win keeps 5-6 New Mexico alive for a bowl game, and they just have to beat Hawaii next week to reach one. This game also eliminates Washington State from college football playoff contention and was a massive result for any team on the bubble of a CFP at-large bid. A couple other notable results. Number 25 Tulane murdered Navy 35-0. No respect for the troops, just like Notre Dame. And I'm not so sure that the group of five picture is as clear as it looks. Tulane might be the best group of five team. And I know they lost to Kansas State and Oklahoma, and Boise State's losses to Oregon, and Army hasn't lost at all. But just watching this team play lately, I think the Green Wave should be right in that conversation. All right, real quick before Kings of the Week, I wanted to highlight my picks from last Saturday because they were pretty good. I went 10-2 in straight-up game picks and 7-4 against the spread. Among those straight-up winners, I had Florida upsetting number 22 LSU, Arizona State upsetting number 16 Kansas State, and I had New Mexico upsetting number 18 Washington State. Then against the spread, some of my best picks there were Wisconsin plus 13.5. They almost beat the number 1 Ducks outright. Tulane minus 6.5. They won 35-0. They quintupled the spread. And then my confidence in New Mexico paid off as well. I got their point spread live in that game, and then they won outright. So if you're new here or if you've just been watching for a little while, I wanted to point that out to give myself some credibility, some legitimacy. From time to time, I know what I'm talking about and have a pretty good grasp of our sport. All right, now it's time for Kings of the Week, a segment where I highlight some of the best performances across the country each and every week. First up, we have TJ Parker, defensive end at Clemson. Against Pitt on Saturday, Parker was responsible for 7 total tackles, 5 tackles for loss, 4 sacks, a pass deflection, and a major forced fumble when he drilled Pitt's quarterback coming around the edge. His 4 sacks and 5 tackles for loss are both tied for the most in a single game by any player in the FBS this season, and a main part of why Clemson was able to win this game was Parker terrorizing that Pitt backfield. Then we have New Mexico quarterback Devin Dampier. Against number 18 Washington State, he had 174 passing yards and a touchdown, but then also had 28 carries for 193 yards and 3 rushing touchdowns. This is their quarterback we're talking about here. 28 carries. He accounted for 367 total yards, 4 total touchdowns, gave the Lobos their first ranked win in over 20 years, and one of their bigger wins in program history. South Carolina quarterback Lenoris Sellers had a monster night against Missouri. He went 21 of 30 for 353 yards, 5 touchdowns, and just 1 interception. And then to add on to that, he had 45 rushing yards as well, 398 total yards, 5 touchdowns, and a ranked win. And lastly, we have Stanford wide receiver Emmett Mosley V, who had 13 receptions for 168 yards and 3 touchdowns against number 19 Louisville, including 2 touchdowns in the fourth quarter to bring the margin from 35-21 Louisville to tied up at 35 before the game-winning field goal. He also had 7 rushing yards too, so 13 receptions, 175 total yards, 3 receiving touchdowns, and a major upset victory. That's going to wrap up this episode of the CFB Kings Show. Really appreciate you hanging out all the way to the end. Apologies for my voice. It's a little bit strained. I was actually at a game this weekend, but it usually sounds a little bit stronger than this. It just feels pretty weak right now. But looking forward to the CFB Top 25 tonight. I'll give my rankings reaction at the beginning of the Thursday episode, so make sure to tune in then as well. Make sure to subscribe if you're watching on YouTube, follow if you're listening on Spotify, and definitely check out at CFB Kings on Twitter and Instagram for all things college football. Thank you so much for watching. Have a fantastic rest of your day, and take care.